Well, good morning, everyone. It is 10:30 approximately on September 8th, 2021, and my name is Janice Courtcamp, and I think most people watching this are familiar with my work on Syria and the war there. For the past nearly 9 years, I've been researching that conflict and the country, and have made 7 extended trips traveling around Syria during the course of the war from 2016 through the end of 2019, and have been journaling this experience of learning what I've learned, research that I find credible and important, and my own personal observations and experiences on the ground there. So I'm doing this video because there has been quite a bit of pressure put on me by some individuals to be more active and vocal about this COVID situation that's been going on since 2020. And while I have made some forays into sharing my thoughts and opinions at times about the situation, I have always tried to make it clear that in regards to what has been going on around the world since January, February, March 2020, and what the work that I've done about Syria, that that's quite different, because in regards to Syria, I believe I have enough knowledge and experience to be a credible voice regarding that situation. Regarding COVID, not so much. I'm just somebody who's going through it, like I said, and been trying to navigate these very difficult and trying times. So I wanted to talk about why, explain in this video why I haven't really been on any particular bandwagon about this COVID stuff. The first and foremost is a promise that I made to myself way back many years ago, that I would remain focused on Syria regardless of whatever else distractions, no matter how serious, came up, either in my personal life or in issues in my country or around the world. And I've kept to that promise. It's a very personal thing for me. As I've explained before, there are a few things, few causes that I would die for. I would not hesitate to step out in front of a moving train or a speeding bullet to save my granddaughters if they were in any kind of danger, for example. And I had to, before each trip to Syria, and with Sid, my husband, determine, that yes, this was something that we both agreed was so important to both of us that it was worth the risks of going into a war zone. And so this is how I defined really taking a stand on something. Would I be willing to risk my life or to lose my life in the process? So my stand on Syria remains steadfast. Regarding COVID and the various measures and other dimensions of this whole situation, I haven't had a particular stand on that level, because I've been focusing more on just research. And I think Sid mentioned today, when I was kind of wrestling through all this with him this morning of making this video, and he said, you've been focusing on research versus reaction, and I like that. When I first started studying Syria, the war in Syria, I determined to do it in a holistic way, if you will. I wasn't just interested, for example, in the political and military situation, but I wanted to get to know Syria holistically, you know, the history, the art, the culture, the people, the cuisine. I was studying, you know, what wildlife there is there, what's the natural flora and fauna, what are the industries, what are the, you know, what do they farm, what do they produce, all of these things, that all this kind of input to really get to know the situation in context. And, you know, I was gratified in that research by, you know, I've described it many times, of literally falling in love with that country and those people. And the what I had learned in research over the course of from 2012 through to the middle of 2016 was confirmed exponentially so when I got to be there and travel around. I travel around mostly on my own with Syrian friends as guides and translators. I have done some traveling completely solo, and spent many weeks completely solo, especially in Damascus. But yeah, it was, you know, what I had found out online became so much more real when I was there, and also so much more complex and nuanced and rich and deep. And, you know, this is kind of the approach that I've tried to take also, because COVID, again, in all its dimensions, has affected most of our lives in many ways. I wanted to approach this in a similar vein. It's not as interesting to me. I'm an old, very, very, very amateur archaeologist and historian. So Syria, you know, there was a natural tendency to love that country that's so ancient and has so much rich history. But I have been trying to be, when not focusing on Syria and the other conflicts in the Middle East region, to put some focus and attention on COVID, the COVID situation. I wish I had a better name for it. In a disciplined, pragmatic, holistic way, if you will. And, you know, what I've seen has been distressing and depressing. And one of the ways and reasons why it's been maybe easier than it might normally be to stay out of the fray, if you will, and not be as vocal on my opinions is because I really found it from the get-go to be like just awful to be frank. Extremely emotional for people. I get that. We're talking about life and death in many, again, different facets and dimensions. Mental consequences, emotional consequences, far-reaching consequences, possible trajectories of different policies and actions and, you know, events and things. But really the discussions that I saw, for the most part online, were just so, you know, amongst people that were completely entrenched in whatever position they were holding. As someone who's very entrenched about, you know, Syria, I can understand that. But it just made for an impossible discussion to join in on, to be, for me, because it was like, joining in some mud fight. So where I'm at right now is because, I'm so torn, because following these foreign wars and really being completely immersed in them, and again, truly attempting to be a fair, honest, pragmatic researcher, looking at these things from many different sides and windows, and really trying to be a person of integrity in going through this process. But really, over the course of time and looking through enough details and original source material, my own observations, etc., the pattern of abuses and corruption and lies and utter hypocrisy, and in many times what I call, truly evil policies and actions by the government of my country and others, the games, the cover-ups, all of these things, of course, that has made me completely skeptical and critical of anything that either, my government, or I hate saying my government, the United States of America's government and other Western governments and affiliated governments say, and the mainstream media, the establishment media, even the most respected, what are considered respectable journals, etc., has been such a, forgive the crude term, shit show. I mean, it has forced me to be completely skeptical and critical throughout this COVID situation. So that's my basic viewpoint that I've come at, and this is what I've discussed in some of my posts about this. At the same time, I love our online activist community. How much I appreciate and encourage independent individual research and all of these things. There are some tendencies among the online activist greater community to engage in, kind of piranha-like feeding frenzies and attacks sometimes, and I don't think that's particularly beneficial to what we're trying to do. So, for example, I was seeing, sorry, I've got allergies and my throat gets clogged up. What I saw, even from the earliest moments of COVID, as things were first coming out, this attacking of anyone who was concerned about the virus called COVID. And I remember, gosh, I think it was weeks in, it might have been 3 weeks in or something, I could be wrong about that, a woman who had been very involved in organizing a wonderful, effective conferences, telling the truth about the war in Syria, was viciously attacked for merely showing concern that she didn't want to get this virus, and that really disturbed me, and I thought it was very sad, because we're all flawed human beings. We're all human beings that have weaknesses and strengths. All of us tend to have some kind of innate fear of something, with me it's spiders. I can appreciate that spiders are a valuable part of the natural ecosystem, but they give me the creeps. And for a lot of people, concern about germs and viruses is something that they're viscerally afraid of, and, it's understandable to me. So this thing was starting, and, I was just watching the information coming out and trying to follow the numbers, every day or a couple times a day or what have you. But early on, it never struck me that the numbers, as awful as they were, I mean, you couldn't trust the data to save your life, because it was just all so crazy and chaotic. And, there was a lot of insane stuff going on. I think one state, if it was Oregon or Washington, admitted they included a gunshot victim in their count for somebody who died from COVID, that sort of thing. So we knew the numbers were questionable at best, but, that's all we had. So I'm watching these numbers, and at no point, even as sad and tragic as many of them were, whether it was from Italy or Spain or all these other hot spots, clearly people were dying. And I know some people will say, no, there's no such thing as a virus, whatever, blah, blah. I've lost loved ones to this thing that you say doesn't exist. I suffered from chronic Lyme for 5 years that many people claim doesn't exist. I'm not in your camp. Just tell you that. I'm not in your camp. I know 4 highly qualified doctors, including one that's been treating hundreds of COVID patients here locally, who's a dear friend, scientists, etc., who are as critical and skeptical of the government and media as I am, if not more so. And, none of them deny that there's such a thing as a distinct virus that's been labeled COVID-19. And they described for me at length as to why they think that is. Intriguingly, I think all of them have, over the course of this, stated that their feeling is that it probably was a manipulated, a man-manipulated virus. They're not super strong on that opinion, but that was kind of their gut feeling. So I haven't ever been one to be someone who says that this doesn't exist. Also, over the course of this, I've seen people, really, some people, I'm not talking about huge groups, but there have been some people that have dismissed every single COVID death, or even made fun of them, ridiculed people who were mourning loved ones, or harassed them with their pet opinions. I've written about this before. And yet I've seen some of those same names wearing sackcloth and ashes for any adverse reaction to the vaccine, or, the tragic deaths of people who've died after the vaccine. So you kind of, I think it shouldn't be a surprise to people that if your compassion seems inconsistent and even convenient to support your opinion about all this, that it doesn't really increase the credibility of your argument. In other words, often people were talking about how most of the people who died were reported dying from or with corona, COVID, had comorbidities, and I've heard this again and again. Well, it's true. We saw in Canada how 92%, at least for the first, 6 months or even a year, 92%, I think, of their deaths were in nursing homes, among the elderly, many of whom, of course, did have serious diseases or conditions. So yes, that's part of this whole thing, but that doesn't explain the young mother of 2 young children I know of who died from COVID. Nor does it really speak much to humanity if we are dismissing deaths of people who, yes, they might be obese, they might be smokers, they might be have cancer or diabetes or what have you, and yet the ones I know of, personally, some of them did have significant conditions that were very health-threatening, and yet they were alive, and they were doing okay, and many of them were doing quite well. I think of someone that many of us knew online, Gary Matthews, and I believe he had gone through cancer, and he was young and a lot younger than I am, and you could see him out hiking, and he was a wonderful spokesman and advocate and activist for supporting Syria's sovereignty. And he died of COVID. He was a very I don't even know what term to use. He was anti-mask, anti-lockdown, of course, and he died of COVID. And I didn't really see any particular soul searching among online activists about this very sad premature death. He seemed like a really good guy. And that should bring some sobering, I thought, into the rhetoric, but it didn't. For the record, you can see it on my posts. I hate the masks. I hate them with a passion. They drive me crazy. They're uncomfortable. I do have trouble breathing in them. They fog up my reading glasses. They make it hard to see, low. They mess up, I've got older ears now and probably went to too many rock concerts, and my hearing isn't what it once was. And I got somebody shaking me like this, and I'm trying to talk to them, what is that? And it drives me crazy. I hate the things. I've worn them when I've been asked to, without much bitching and moaning. To me, that wasn't my big, I didn't have that wasn't that huge of an issue for me. And part of that is because, my mind and my heart are with people who, their families have been blown to bits. They're mourning their children. They've lost everything. Getting slowly starved in many cases. Losing their hopes and all of this stuff. And so, for me personally, wearing a mask was just, comparatively, it wasn't that big of an issue. So, sorry, I know for a lot of you it is, but for me it's just not. I was, for the record again, I've been against the mandatory lockdowns of healthy people. To me, it doesn't make any sense. You're right. Whoever's out there right now saying, you're not a doctor, you're not a scientist. Yeah, you're right. I'm not. I got a brain. I'm not afraid to use it. Sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong. I make my own decisions about my health. You know, if there's a storm outside and I need to get in my car, I'll stop and think about, you know, do I really need the milk that bad, or should I just wait for the storm to finish? You know, I'm making these kinds of decisions in my life all the time. And, you know, of course, somebody who goes into a war zone and, you know, at one point I was even in the desert in Deir ez-Zor and Al-Mayadeen, where ISIS was very strong. It was considered the most dangerous place in the world at the time. So personal safety obviously is not my top priority any more than it is for somebody who is a free rock climber or a firefighter or, you know, whatever. I mean, there are just a lot of us that personal safety is not the biggest priority of our lives. So there you go. I'm kind of rambling here, and I apologize for that. But I just wanted to talk with you. You know, the other reason I've been against mandatory, you know, lockdowns of entire populations is it seemed quite obvious that the cat was already out of the bag, that it was like locking the barn door after the cows have all escaped. You know, clearly the virus was around. I think it's, to me, I think it seems very clear the virus has been around a lot longer than was initially reported. And so there's a certain amount of pragmatic acceptance of the fact that this virus is out in the world, and, you know, the world has to deal with it. And how you deal with it is you try to be smart without shooting yourself in the head. And these lockdowns struck me always as kind of shooting yourself in the head. You can't, you know, you had people working for minimum wage at a grocery store and stuff being called essential workers, and they had to go to work, and I was one of those in the beginning part of this thing. You know, the amount of exposure is insane if you're working at a grocery store, and that was, you know, when the powers that be were telling everybody, oh, don't get a mask, you don't need a mask, don't get a mask, we need those for the healthcare workers. And then you got some schmuck like me in a grocery store where everybody coming through, you know, can be sniffling, coughing, sneezing. The kids are wiping their faces and rubbing everything down. I mean, it was just like, you know, what part of this just isn't making sense? And, you know, this is how I've looked at a lot of these measures, is many of them were completely arbitrary, in my opinion. Not effective, very effective in, I think, reducing people's natural health. You know, when you're arresting people for being out on a beach doing what they should be doing, which is a very healthy thing to do, there's something wrong there. And, you know, this was quite obvious to me. I hope this is making sense. I don't know if it is. Regarding vaccines, you know, same way. I've become a total skeptic and critic of anything that is big money, especially in my country, the United States of America. I have not come in contact with any entity that is involved in big money that is not, in my opinion, a racket. Doesn't mean it started that way. Doesn't mean there aren't good people involved, people of integrity and goodwill and highly knowledgeable, etc. But overall, you know, organizations, entities, industries, you know, are huge rackets in this country. And so, you know, looking at pharmaceutical companies here, for example, you know, I've taken medications over the years. I'm not on any medication typically, but if I'm very, very sick and need an antibiotic, I'm very happy to get on an antibiotic, and you know what? They've helped. So it's not that I'm not vehemently anti-pharmaceutical company products across the board, but I do know that they're in business to make money. They're in business to make profits for their, higher ups especially, and for their investors. And so that is going to cloud any, trust that I might have about these vaccines by these companies that, have rap sheets. I mean, we're talking about companies that have been engaged in massive lawsuits about things, including, misrepresenting test results and products that are harmful or contain harmful chemicals and elements, and which are, for these products, immune from accountability lawsuits for the most part, stand to make tens and tens and tens and tens of billions of dollars for themselves and their investors. And, I'm not going to fool myself into thinking that they're doing it, for our good. They're doing it to make profits from. So, we're also talking about vaccines that are utilizing unused before technologies. I just saw an article that much of this actually stemmed from research DARPA had been doing, which is, the big defense research agency that comes up with all these wonderful ways of massacring people around the globe to make profits for various and sundry weapons manufacturers, contractors, government officials on their take, and that sort of thing. So, my trust level in the vaccines, even from the get-go, was zero. In other words, I'm going to look at everything very, very cynically and critically. And then since the vaccine rollout, of course, we're finding all kinds of new information about their effectiveness or their lack of effectiveness over time from what research appears to be showing. The need for boosters. There's a pill form apparently coming out that, boosts the vaccines. And, this is cha-ching, billions, more and more tens of billions of dollars for these pharmaceutical companies. And that's okay with me. That is totally okay with me. Under our system, they have every right to make tens and tens and tens and tens and tens of billions of dollars. My only question is, how effective and what are the risks? And for me personally, does the benefit outweigh the risks? Up until this moment in time, and as far as I can tell for the foreseeable future, my personal answer is no. For me, someone who's healthy, I'm not that young, I'll be 60 this year, but I work out, eat fruits and, eat the vegetables from our garden, have a good diet, and what I think is very important to health, a very thankful and contented and generally happy disposition, I think all of those things go into the mix. And, I have known people have died from COVID, absolutely. One particularly very close and dear friend. Known many people, dozens of people who have had COVID. My brother had it. He also is healthy, he's trim, he's active, he's got a good diet, he's got a good outlook on life. He had a great doctor who really, was very focused on all his patients, boosting their immune system over the course of this thing. My brother still got it. He still got it to beat the band. I mean, he was in dire straits. He got double pneumonia. His doctor chose to treat him at home. He chose to go that route as well, which I think was wise for him. And, you know, there were weeks where he was too weak to even talk on the phone or anything. He was really suffering. But he came through it. He's back to 100%, and he's good. So I'm thankful for that. His wife had it, but, you know, for her it was kind of a typical kind of flu-like symptoms thing. Just had two young people very close to us. Both of them got it. A couple days, especially the husband was pretty sick, you know, but then they were fine. Most of the people I've known who've had COVID have described it on the spectrum. For my brother, who had it very, very bad, to had barely any symptoms at all, almost no problem. Same is true for those of you, not for those of you, same is true for the people I know who've had the vaccines. So now I'm talking dozens and dozens of acquaintances, friends, and family who've had the vaccines. Almost all of them had no issues at all with it. Some of them did get sick for a couple hours or a night. My mom had got shingles as a result, and had delusions, and it was kind of scary there for a while. She's fine. And then a friend of ours I've talked about has had his Lyme disease come back with a vengeance, complete with meningitis and a hospitalization. So that's been on a spectrum as well. But, to be honest with you, I'm against the vaccine. I don't have any intention of taking the vaccine for myself. The trajectory of numbers, even if you say only 10% of the numbers are reported on VAERS, for example, or any of the other sources of adverse reactions, there's no trajectory that I see that they're going to kill 80 million people and they're trying to kill us all and all this stuff. I'm simply not seeing that any more than I was seeing it at the beginning of COVID itself, when they were trying to get us all in a panic, and yet the numbers just weren't there. The trajectory of numbers was not going to match the projections that we were seeing. It doesn't mean it wasn't still bad. And I'm not saying the adverse reactions, and I think there are, quite a number of deaths directly attributable to the vaccines, are not tragic. In my opinion, they're very tragic. The numbers aren't there, in my opinion, for the catastrophic results that some people have been talking about, but, very serious indeed. And my biggest bone of contention about the vaccines was, I've said it many times, most of us have seen these drug ads by these pharmaceutical companies, and, they all look about the same. In fact, there have been many parodies done on them. But roughly, half or two-thirds of the commercials are typically, possible adverse reactions. And that simply has not been a part of the conversation, of course, about these vaccines for COVID. And this, in my opinion, has been criminal. So it's just take the vaccine, take the vaccine, take the vaccine. Yes, many people have researched it. I'm not saying that. But the general cultural conversation on the media and by government and among people has been just get the jab, just get the jab, just get the jab. We have to have you. You have to get it. And this is, in my opinion, treating people like children. And, often we people behave as children, I admit that. But, it wasn't anything that would ever result in me having any greater trust in the vaccines. So that's where I'm at with that. Vehemently against mandatory vaccines. I think that's grotesque. Vehemently against the things that are happening, like in Australia, where it's true martial law. You know, you've got the police, you've got the army, you've got police dogs, helicopters, all these kinds of things being employed to force people to stay in their homes. You know, I just find that, you know, it's an obscene abuse of power. And Australia's numbers are incredibly low. Now you'll say, oh, that's because they've been so draconian. Possibly, or possibly not. You know, but, you know, because we know, like, for example, countries, surprisingly for a lot of people, you know, other countries like in Africa have not had terrible numbers regarding COVID. In fact, you know, the so-called developed world has had significantly worse numbers. There's a reason for that. Let's find out what it is. My gut feeling is a big part of that is lowering people's immunity and health, their mental health, their emotional health, and their physical health by these lockdowns, as well as, of course, economic health. What else? The shape of things to come. You know, I just went to the Ron Paul conference in near D.C., and the title of the conference was The War Against Us. And many excellent speakers there, bringing up many important points. And the continuing possible, again, a trajectory of reduction of freedoms, takeover of control of our lives by the government, etc. Very troubling developments that could be coming along the pipe. Not a lot of optimism, to be honest, and among the speakers at the conference. So, you know, could darker days be coming? Absolutely. I think a lot of times people in the predicting the future biz, you know, whether they're doing it out of passion or for profit or whatever, the people at the conference are out of passion. You know, these are people that are not involved for some kind of malignant underlying agenda. You know, I think they kind of disregard often the chaos that comes from just dealing with human beings. We're seeing this in Europe with these huge protests against many of these measures, and increasingly, I think, in Australia as well. You have the natural tendency of people in the West, particularly in America, of running out of steam and attention on things. You know, we're known for having the attention span of fleas, not very patient, not very long-suffering, etc. So there are those elements to think about. We've got, of course, these huge economic implications. You know, is there going to be a great economic reset? You know, does a bear shit in the woods? I mean, this happens routinely through history, and we're seeing, you know, all of the signs of this, and increased consolidation of wealth at the very top. We knew the U.S. dollar was becoming more and more of a paper tiger. That the protection racket for the U.S. dollar has driven a lot of the motivations for these wars, as a matter of fact. So, you know, clearly there are signs that there's this huge bubble that's going to burst and something else will be reborn out of it. Typically, that does not serve the lives of the general population. How bad will it be? How extensive will it be? I have no clue. Well, you know, I don't go about predicting the future. I've learned that I have no talent or skill in that direction, and I'm not going there anymore. But certainly there are certain paths that, if they're stayed on, could be very rough. Very rough indeed. And, you know, as a grandmother now, I care. I care about the lives of our sons and our granddaughters and others here. But I will tell you this. That my main focus will continue to be on the people who are suffering and dying and in misery because of the wars that have been created and continued by the government and military-industrial intelligence complex of my country. You know, you talk about lockdowns. I know people in Homs, Syria, that could not leave their apartments for years because if they stepped out of their apartment, there were snipers waiting to shoot their heads off of them. That's lockdown, gang. And they had to figure out a way of surviving through all that. And you know what? The ones I know, my friends over there, they did it with a lot. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to condemn anyone. But a spirit of still making the most out of what they had, finding whatever joy they could, laughing at jokes, you know, not being consumed by bitterness and anger. Better people than I will ever be, that I could ever possibly be. So if you want to blast me for not dealing with the thing that's in front of our face that billions of people around the globe are totally fixated on and dealing with, I don't care. I'm going to be one of the ones that are still saying, could we please stop bombing people to smithereens, bombing countries to smithereens, deliberately starving entire populations, and that is where I'm going to keep my focus. And I don't care if I have 0 followers and friends, or thank God for the thousands, you know, the 20,000 or so that I have. I'm thankful for all of them every day. But I'm not here to please anybody. I'm here to just be honest and open and real and share with you what's important to me. And that's all I've ever promised anyone to do. So I'll leave this here with that. I don't know if I made any sense in this thing. These are crazy times. I care about people. I care about you all watching. I care about people, whatever side of this COVID situation they're at. You know, heck, I was in Al Mayadeen. It had just been 2 weeks ago before liberated from ISIS. This was at the end of 2017. I'm seeing these 2 dead ISIS fighters on the street. They, you know, they're Saudis. They stink to holy hide. Oh, you know, the stench was unbelievable. It was just this nasty, awful sight. I had virtually no compassion for these guys. I know full well what they've been up to. And yet, you know, again, as a mother and grandmother, I couldn't help but think at one point they were 2 little babies, and a combination of inputs, parenting events, who knows, influence of friends, who knows, bad decisions, what brought them to die so wretchedly after committing horrors in the Syrian desert. And on that level, I guess I did care about them. You friends and folks out here, I do care about you. I care about your families. I care about your opinions. I care if you're mourning people. I care if you're celebrating for people, and I just always prefer to build bridges as opposed to burning them. I burn a few. I'm not afraid of that, but I prefer to build them. I wish you well. Thank you for listening if you're still with me. God bless you. Bye-bye.